Hello everyone, welcome to my channel Economica. I'm Dr. Gopal B. Saraswat. Welcome to you my channel. Please like, share and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Today our topic is elasticity. This is one of the most important topic from the managerial economics, where students generally found themselves very reluctant while understanding the concept of elasticity. Let's start with the concept of elasticity. First of all, while discussing the elasticity, we need to understand the difference between the elasticity and the law of demand. Law of demand tells us about the directional movement or the directional change in the quantity demand due to the change in price. If price increases, quantity demand goes down or vice versa, but it never tells us about how much percentage point if we make a change in prices the quantity demand of a product going to change. So for calculating that proportionate change we need to understand the concept of elasticity. So the elasticity gives us the not only the directional change but also gives tells us about the responsive change as well. So this means that where the law of demand is having a limitation just up to the directional movement of a quantity demand along with the price, the elasticity gives us the further scope of identifying the responsive change of quantity demand due to change in price in terms of percentage. So elasticity of demand is telling us or let us calculate the degree of responsive change in quantity demand of a commodity to a given change in price. This means that if we make a change of X percent in the price of a commodity, what kind of quantity demand change we may expect in the demand. So this is what the responsive change we are talking about. So responsive change we also know it about the proportionate change. So elasticity divides this responsive change of quantity demand with the change within the prices on the five different levels. We call these five different levels as a degree of price elasticity. So the first degree of price elasticity is perfectly elastic demand. Second is highly elastic demand, unitary elastic demand, relatively inelastic demand, and perfectly inelastic demand. So these five degrees let us understand how these five degrees are different from each other. Let's discuss the first two, perfectly elastic and highly elastic demand. In case of perfectly elastic demand, when a producer make a change in its prices, let's say if it decreases its price, the whole demand of the market comes to this particular firm. So this means that the demand becomes infinite, and vice versa. If it increases price, then the demand becomes zero. For example, in a case of a sabji mandi, if a producer decide to sell its potato at a rate of 50 rupees per kg, but the whole market is selling at 20 rupees per kg, nobody is going to buy from that particular seller. So this means that either you are getting the whole demand of the market or you are getting a zero demand from a market if you make any sort of change in price. So therefore, in perfectly elastic demand curve, the demand curve is parallel to x-axis as you can see in the first graph. Secondly, the highly elastic demand curve. In highly elastic demand curve, the proportionate change in price is less than the proportionate change in quantity demand. This means that if a producer make a change of 1% in its price, the change in quantity demand, or you can say the response from the quantity demand, will be more than the change in price. So quantity demand either decreases or increases more than the change in the price. So from P1 to P2, if price changes by 1%, the quantity demand which is from Q1 to Q2 will change more than 1%. This is highly elastic demand curve. So let's move to the other degrees of elasticity, that is the third one, unitary elastic demand. In unitary elastic demand, the proportionate change, or you can say the percentage change in price, is equal to the response from the quantity demand change. This means that if you make a change of 1% in price, you are almost sure that the quantity demand is going to change by 1%. Similarly, in case of relatively inelastic demand curve, here you are finding something different from the unitary elastic, which means that your proportionate change in price is more than the proportionate change in quantity demand. To understand this concept better, you have to compare this concept from the highly elastic demand curve. In highly elastic demand curve, the proportionate change in price is less than the proportionate change in quantity demand, as you can see here. But in relatively inelastic demand curve, the proportionate change in price is more than the proportionate change in quantity demand, which means that relatively inelastic demand is opposite to the highly elastic demand curve. Here, if you make a change in price by 5%, the quantity demand is going to change by less than 5%. This is what it indicates. Further, perfectly inelastic demand curve, here the whatever the make changes you are making in your price of a commodity, that is not going to have any change on the demand of the product. So this means that the customers or the consumers are very highly insulated from the price change in this such kind of cases. This is the fifth degree, which is known as perfectly inelastic demand. So, if we summarize all 5 degrees of price elasticity, we can say that if elasticity of price is infinite, which is EP is equal to infinite, which means that the elasticity is perfectly elastic, which means that the demand curve is parallel to x-axis. If EP is equal to 0, which means that perfectly inelastic demand curve, where you are not having any sort of change in quantity demand due to change in prices. Further, if EP, which is elasticity in price, is greater than 1, which is highly elastic, the change in quantity demand is more than the change in price. Further, the elasticity is less than 1, which means that the change in price is more than the change in quantity demand. And finally, unitary elastic demand curve, where the change in proportionate change in price is equal to the proportionate change in the quantity demand. So, on the demand curve, we can see that at the midpoint of the demand curve indicates elasticity equal to 1, which we already discussed in the previous video, where I just let you understand how the why elasticity is at midpoint is equal to 1. You can watch that video from my channel. And if you move in the left handwards, when elasticity increases, if it becomes greater than 1, highly elastic, EP is equal to infinite, that is perfectly elastic. But if you move downwards in the right hand side, then from the midpoint, then the elasticity becomes less than 1 and later on it becomes 0. This means that how degree of plasticity keep on changing over the demand curve slope. These degrees let us understand how the firm has to make a decision in the actual market. So how you are going to calculate the elasticity? To calculate elasticity, the very same formula we have here, that is the change in quantity demand Q2 minus Q1 divided by Q1 and divided by P2 minus P1, which is showing the change in prices. So if you calculate, you will have elasticity of price. So let's understand a one particular exercise. Suppose a quantity demand of coconut is initially 800 units and the price was 10 rupees per piece. But the demand increases from 800 to 1000, and just because the firm decided to decrease its price up to 8 rupees. So price declined by 2 rupees and demand increases by 200 units. So let's calculate the type of elasticity here. So here we have a formula Q2 minus Q1 upon Q1, P2 minus P1 upon P1. So the change in quantity from 1000 to from 800 to 1000, it becomes positive 200 change. Okay. Then we have Q1. Q1 is initial quantity demand, that is 800 divided by P2 minus P1. P2 here is P2 is the current price 8 rupees and the previous one is 10 rupees. So negative 2 rupees here we have, and finally the previous price, that is 10 rupees. Once we calculate, we got elasticity negative 1.25. So generally we calculate, obviously we calculate elasticity in terms of mode, which indicates that whatever the value of elasticity is always calculated in form of positive value. So 1.25 means which is greater than 1. So elasticity is greater than 1, which means that this is the relatively elastic demand where the change in price leads to the more change in quantity demand. So this is how elasticity helps us to understand the concept of managerial economics. Thank you for watching this video. Please like, share and subscribe my YouTube channel Economica. This is Dr. Gopal B. Saraswat. I'll further bring more videos for you. Thank you everyone for joining in.